Singapore, officially the Republic of Singapore, and often referred to as the Lion City, the Garden City, and the Red Dot, is a leading global city-state and island country in Southeast Asia. It lies 1 degree north of the equator, at the southernmost tip of continental Asia and peninsular Malaysia, with Indonesia's Riau Islands to the south. Singapore's territory consists of the diamond-shaped main island and more than 60 significantly smaller islets. Since the 1960s, ongoing land reclamation has increased Singapore's land area, which is highly urbanized, by at least 20%. The islands were settled from the 2nd century AD by a series of local empires. In 1819, Sir Stamford Raffles founded Singapore as a trading post of the East India Company. After the company collapsed, the islands were ceded to Britain and became part of its Straits settlements in 1826. During World War II, Singapore was occupied by Japan. It became independent from Britain in 1963, by uniting with other former British territories to form Malaysia, but was expelled 2 years later over ideological differences. After early years of turbulence, and despite lacking natural resources and a hinterland, the nation developed rapidly as an Asian tiger economy, based on external trade and its human capital. Singapore is a global commerce, financial and transportation hub. Its standings include easiest place to do business for 10 consecutive years, most technology-ready nation, top international meetings city with best investment potential, second most competitive country, third largest foreign exchange center, fourth largest financial center, third largest oil refining and trading center, and one of the top 2 busiest container ports since the 1990s. Singapore's best-known global brands include Singapore Airlines and Changi Airport, both amongst the most awarded in their industry. SIA is also rated by Fortune Surveys as Asia's most admired company. For the past decade, it is the only Asian country with the top AAA sovereign rating from all major credit rating agencies, including S&P, Moody's and Fitch. Singapore ranks high on key measures of national social policies. It leads Asia, and 9th globally, on the Human Development Index, including education, healthcare, life expectancy, quality of life, personal safety, housing. Although income inequality is high, 90% of citizens own their homes, and the country has one of the highest per capita incomes. The cosmopolitan nation is home to 5.5 million residents, 38% of whom are permanent residents and other foreign nationals. Singaporeans are mostly bilingual, with English as their common language and a second mother tongue language. Its cultural diversity is reflected in its extensive hawker cuisine and major ethnic festivals, Chinese, Malay, Indian, Western, which are all national holidays. In 2015, Lonely Planet and The New York Times listed Singapore as their top and 6th best world destination to visit respectively. The nation's core principles are meritocracy, multiculturalism and secularism. It is noted for its effective, pragmatic and incorrupt governance and civil service, which together with its rapid development policies, is widely cited as the Singapore model. Gallup polls shows 84% of its residents expressed confidence in the national government, one of the highest ratings recorded. Singapore has significant influence on global affairs relative to its size, leading some analysts to classify it as a middle power. It is ranked as Asia's most influential city and 4th in the world by Forbes. Singapore is a unitary multi-party parliamentary republic, with a Westminster system of unicameral parliamentary government. The People's Action Party has won every election since self-government in 1959. One of the 5 founding members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Singapore is also the host of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Secretariat, and a member of the East Asia Summit, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Commonwealth of Nations. Etymology. The English name of Singapore is derived from the Malay word, Singapura. Hence the lion is embraced in many of the nation's symbols and the customary reference to the nation as the Lion City. However, it is unlikely that lions ever lived on the island, sang Nelia Utama, who founded and named the island Singapura. Most likely saw a Malayan tiger. Since the 1970s, Singapore has also been widely known as the Garden City, owing to its extensive greening policy covering the whole island. A priority of its first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, dubbed the nation's chief gardener. The nickname, Red Dot, is a reference to its size on the map, contrasting with its achievements. In 2015, Singapore's Golden Jubilee year, the celebratory SG50 branding is depicted inside a red dot. History. For the historical city that was part of British Singapore, see Singapore City Temasek, a 2nd century outpost of the Sumatran Srivijaya Empire, is the earliest known settlement on Singapore. The island was part of the Srivijaya Empire until it was invaded by the South Indian Emperor Rajendra Chola I of the Chola Empire, in the 11th century. In the 13th century, the Kingdom of Singapore was established on the island and it became a trading port city. It was, however, invaded by 2 major foreign invasions before being destroyed by the Majapahit in 1398. In 1613, Portuguese raiders burned down the settlement, which was part of the Johor Sultanate, and the island sank into obscurity for the next 2 centuries. Nominally, it belonged to the Johor Sultanate during this period, while the maritime region and trade was under Dutch control. British colonisation. In 1819, Thomas Stamford Raffles arrived and signed a treaty with Sultan Hussein Shah of Johor, on behalf of the British East India Company, to develop the southern part of Singapore as a British trading post. In 1824, the entire island became a British possession under a further treaty with the Sultan, as well as the Temanggung. In 1826, Singapore became part of the Straits Settlements, under the jurisdiction of British India, becoming the regional capital in 1836. Prior to Raffles' arrival, there were approximately 1,000 people living on the island, mostly indigenous Malays along with a handful of Chinese. By 1860, the population exceeded 80,000 and more than half were Chinese. Many immigrants came to work at rubber plantations and, after the 1870s, the island became a global center for rubber exports. After the First World War, the British built the large Singapore Naval Base. Lieutenant General Sir William George Shedden Dobby was appointed General Officer Commanding of the Malaya Command on 8 November 1935, holding the post until 1939. In May 1938, he warned how Singapore could be conquered by the Japanese via an attack from northern Malaya, but his warnings were not heeded, resulting in the fall of Singapore nearly 4 years later in early 1942 during World War II. World War II and Japanese occupation. During World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army invaded British Malaya, culminating in the Battle of Singapore. The British surrendered on 15 February 1942. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the defeat the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. Between 5,000 and 25,000 ethnic Chinese people were killed in the subsequent Soching massacre. From November 1944 to May 1945, the Allies conducted an intensive bombing of Singapore. The Japanese occupied Singapore until the British repossessed it in September 1945, after the surrender of Japan. David Marshall, pro-independence leader of the Labour Front, won Singapore's first general election in 1955. He led a delegation to London, but Britain rejected his demand for complete self-rule. He subsequently resigned to be replaced by Lim Yew Hock, whose policies convinced Britain to grant Singapore full internal self-government for all matters except defence and foreign affairs. During the May 1959 elections, the People's Action Party won a landslide victory. Singapore became an internally self-governing state within the Commonwealth, and Lee Kuan Yew became the country's first prime minister. Governor Sir William Almond Codrington Good served as the first Yang di-Pertuan Negara, and was succeeded by Yusof bin Ishak, who became the first president of Singapore in 1965. During the 1950s, Chinese communists with strong ties to the trade unions and Chinese schools carried out an armed uprising against the government, leading to the Malayan Emergency and later, the Communist Insurgency War. The 1954 National Service riots, Chinese middle schools riots, and Hockley bus riots in Singapore were all linked to these events. Merger with Malaysia. File. Singapore during the formation of Malaysia. JPG. Thumb. The founding father of modern Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew declaring the formation of the Federation of Malaysia on 16 September 1963 in Singapore, as a result of the 1962 merger referendum. On 31 August 1963 Singapore joined with the Federation of Malaya, the Crown Colony of Sarawak and the Crown Colony of North Borneo to form the new Federation of Malaysia under the terms of the Malaysia Agreement. Singaporean leaders chose to join Malaysia primarily due to concerns over its limited land size, scarcity of water, markets and natural resources. Some Singaporean and Malaysian politicians were also concerned that the Communists might form the government on the island, a possibility perceived as an external threat to the Federation of Malaya. However, shortly after the merger, the Singapore state government and the Malaysian central government disagreed on many political and economic issues, and communal strife culminated in the 1964 race riots in Singapore. After many heated ideological conflicts between the two governments, on 9 August 1965, the Malaysian Parliament voted 126-0 to expel Singapore from Malaysia, with Singaporean delegates not present. Independence. 1965 Singapore gained independence as the Republic of Singapore on 9 August 1965. Race riots broke out once more in 1969. In 1967, the country co-founded ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and in 1970 it joined the Non-Aligned Movement. Lee Kuan Yew became Prime Minister, leading its third world economy to first world affluence in a single generation. His emphasis on rapid economic growth, support for business entrepreneurship, limitations on internal democracy, and close relationships with China set the new nation's policies for the next half-century. In 1990, Goh Chok Tong succeeded Lee as Prime Minister, while the latter continued serving in the cabinet as senior minister until 2004, and then minister mentor until May 2011. During his tenure, the country faced the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the 2003 SARS outbreak and terrorist threats posed by Jeremiah Limaya. In 2004, Lee Hsien Loong, the eldest son of Lee Kuan Yew, became the country's third prime minister. He steered the nation through the 2008 global financial crisis, resolved the disputed 79-year-old Malayan Railways land, and introduced integrated resorts. Despite the economy's exceptional growth, PAP suffered its worst election results in 2011, winning 60% of votes. Amidst hot-button issues of high influx of foreign workers and cost of living, Lee initiated a major restructuring of the economy to raise productivity, improved universal healthcare and grants, especially for the pioneer generation of citizens, amongst many new inclusive measures. On 23 March 2015, Singapore grieved the death of its founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, who personified Singapore to the world for nearly half a century. In a week of national mourning, 1.6 million residents and guests paid tribute to him lying in state at Parliament House and community sites around the island. Singapore celebrated its Golden Jubilee in 2015, its 50th year of independence, with a year-long series of events branded SG50.